welcome to the first season of the Is the Planet Doomed podcast. This is a project produced by the students of a course with the same name in the Department of Geography at Colgate University. By unpacking some of the world's most pressing and complex problems, the episodes in this podcast help answer the question, well, are we doomed? In this episode, Aaron Santos looks at the environmental roots of West Africa's recent Ebola outbreak.
Patient zero is the term given to the first known individual infected with the disease. In late December of 2013, Emile Umanu, who was only 2 years old, became patient zero of the worst Ebola outbreak in modern history.
He had a fever. His body was hot. He was shivering. After 2 days, he got worse. He got diarrhea and was refusing to eat. Then he passed away.
Etienne Umanu, Emile's father, could do nothing but watch helplessly as other members of his family fell sick to the same disease. The nature of the infection causes a dramatic and horrifically painful hemorrhagic fever. Patients experience violent vomiting, diarrhea, along with internal and visible external bleeding. This is not the common cold. It is something much, much uglier. What is often overlooked is how the convergence of the global economy and environmental destruction are driving the emergence of catastrophic outbreaks of diseases like Ebola. In 2014, this modern-day plague would spread from Etienne's small rural village in Guinea, across borders to neighboring Liberia and Sierra Leone, and into the major cities of the region. The virus would find its way into almost 30,000 individuals over the course of the next 3 years. Just over 11,000 of these cases were ultimately fatal. But these are just the official numbers documented by the World Health Organization.
You see dead bodies, 15, 16, 17, 18, dead bodies all in body bags. Then I start to wonder, what is happening? Maybe this is the end of the world.
This is the account of Josephine Salou, deputy matron of Kanema Government Hospital. Seeing the scope of this loss, one must wonder, what caused this tragedy? The Ebola virus has been observed in humans before. The first cases of the disease were documented in 1976, but it is likely that small, isolated Ebola events have been occurring in rural jungle communities for much longer. Ebola is not new, so why is it only now causing thousands and thousands of deaths?
We cause disruptions in ecosystems. Pathogens jump from animals to humans, and humans spread these widely. So we go into situations where we upset the ecosystem, we have logging, we have slash and burn, we have agricultural activities, we hunt and eat wild animals, perhaps picking up Ebola, we damage the ecosystem, and we say it's a density-dependent relationship because 7 billion people doing this have far more effects than 7 million people.
That was Dr. Lowenberg, speaking on the topic of climate change and disease. He does not claim that climate change is the only factor that led to the massive death tolls seen in West Africa. That would be a huge oversimplification. But he points out that Ebola is no different from other disasters of our era. When humans change our relationship with the environment, we will inevitably end up facing previously unheard of challenges, be it new weather patterns or new microorganisms. Forces of urbanization, globalization, capitalism, and climate compound to create a constantly and rapidly changing world. This makes for some very complex problems. The Ebola outbreak is no exception. Yes, there were failures, extreme failures in health infrastructure. Yes, there was political inaction. Yes, there was corruption and violence, all at play in this event. But as we dive into some of the other factors at play in this epidemic, we could see that capitalist pressures also caused a critical change in both the West African economy and the people's relationship with their environment, and such changes only further set the stage for disaster. West Africa's relation to the global economy is mainly one of extraction. Policymakers have been willing to turn a blind eye to local needs in order to encourage international investment in resources. Resources like fish. Fish is a central staple of the diets of Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Fishing was once a dependable source of income for those with boats, and a stable protein source for those waiting to buy the fish at local markets.
We are not catching as many fish anymore, and in a small boat like this, we cannot go long distances, so our areas need to be protected.
Recently, however, industrial vessels have taken over the waters. Some of these large vessels fish with legal permission, some do not. Either way, they take the majority of the local fish away from small-scale fishing operations. This fish is then exported and sold in wealthier nations. The local fishermen don't get paid. The locals don't get to eat fish.
In many places, bushmeat is the cheapest protein available beyond caterpillar.
As Dr. Robert Nasai from the Center of International Forestry Research explains, this is where Ebola comes into play.
And by butchering the animal that has been infected, because Ebola is transmitted by contact, they get infected by themselves. So that's the link.
Ebola does not originate in humans. In the case of the West Africa outbreak, the species of origin is believed to be a relative of the fruit bat. Food and economic instability may have played a role in increasing the region's consumption of bushmeat. Hunters go into the jungle looking for food either to eat or to sell. They increase their time spent near the disease-carrying bats and bring potentially infected meat back into contact with the general population. But the fishing industry was not alone in driving people into closer contact with Ebola-carrying bats. A recent boom in the international palm oil industry has meant that thousands of acres of jungle have been converted into palm oil plantations. The once dense biodiversity has been driven away and replaced with neat rows of palm trees. Few species can survive in such an environment, but fruit bats, they thrive. These bats, which were once separated from human contact by thick vegetation, are now making their homes right on the edge of civilization. Okay, so the bats are the likely source of the disease. But once the disease is in a human host, it can be spread from human to human. Ebola spread requires contact with bodily fluids for transmission. More humans live on this planet than ever before. Over the last several decades, the human population has become increasingly concentrated in urban environments, even in still developing countries. Unfortunately, in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, the large majority of this urban population is also remarkably poor. The massive slums around Freetown and Monrovia, the capitals of Sierra Leone and Liberia, were hotbeds for the spread of disease. These slums have poor infrastructure. This means potential contamination of water, limited waste removal, and an overall lower level of sanitation. And more people living under one small roof. All these factors increase the likelihood of human-to-human spread of the disease.
Right now, we cannot hide ourselves from Ebola because why? You can find some people, they are 3 in room. You find some people, they are 5 in room sleeping together.
Lower socioeconomic status was also connected to a decreased likelihood that the sick would go to a hospital. Why would someone who is sick not want help? The cost of medical attention was likely a factor for many, but some blatantly did not trust the authorities.
Fellow citizens, it has become necessary to impose additional sanctions. The communities of West Point in Monrovia are quarantined on a full security watch.
Some believed the Ebola outbreak was a lie created by their government to justify quarantining the slums or to make money. Some did not trust the largely foreign and white aid force. For many West Africans, white foreigners were associated with the international companies that have depleted their resources and driven them out of work. This was the case of the villagers surrounding Sumandu. This land had been the site of a massive iron mining investment, which had employed a large body of local workers. However, the corrupt foreign owner of the investing company realized he could turn a massive profit by simply dropping the project and reselling the land. He did just that. the project was abandoned. Thousands of workers were put out of work just as the Ebola virus struck their community. Rumors and conspiracies churned. Many people in the region believed that the foreign investors had given their community the disease to wipe out evidence of the corrupt dealings. While extreme violence resulted in some communities, most villages simply chose to isolate themselves from external medical aid. Many lives could have been saved if this had not been the case. These examples do not stand alone. Rather, they represent the systematic pressure that globalization has placed on developing regions like West Africa. These developing nations are exploited by global forces for profit, and with few options available, the people and the government are driven to exploitation of their remaining local resources. Ultimately, the ecosystem is destabilized, and eventually, nature always fights back.
There are going to be more of these. No matter what we think, Ebola was not an exception. Ebola is a precedent.
We face a future in which our world will only continue to change. Issues of food stability promise to remain prevalent, especially as the effects of climate change become more apparent. The global population will continue to expand for at least another generation, only placing more stress upon the urban infrastructure. Inequality and corporatization show no signs of slowing down. Diseases like Ebola, and there are several others that have caused similar havoc for similar reasons, will undoubtedly be a part of our future. But this is not a doomsday prophecy. As we come to better understand the interconnectedness of economic, environmental, and societal factors at play in such events, we can begin to see patterns, fix our past faults, and streamline our response. Maybe we will have learned enough to keep the next dangerous infection from becoming an epidemic. For Colgate University, I'm Erin Santos.